Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a proud Oklahoma farmer refuses to sell his land to a powerful suburban HOA, a quiet boundary dispute ignites into an all-out war of sabotage, arson, and legacy. What starts with a fence ends with fire and a fight no one saw coming. I've seen a lot in my life. I've served overseas, run cattle through freezing mud in November, stood between panicked livestock and a busted irrigation main spewing water like a geyser. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the mind-numbing absurdity of dealing with suburban people who believe they're royalty because their HOA has a website and a fancy logo. My name's Randall Bain. I'm 52 years old, third-generation steward of Bain Valley Fields, 4,000 acres of prime Oklahoma farmland, handed down from my grandfather, cultivated by my father, and rebuilt by me after I came back from active duty. We raise Angus beef, rotate soy and corn, and process everything on site. Our barn, built in the mid-40s with post-war timber, has been standing longer than most marriages last these days. That land's in my blood. You can't fake legacy. You earn it in dirt and sweat. Everything ran like clockwork until a few years ago, when some jackass developer decided that the patch of overgrazed pasture east of my property would make a fine place for millionaire dentists and their yoga wives to sip Chardonnay by an artificial lake. And so, just like that, the South Prairie Lake community was born, HOA and all. I didn't pay them much mind at first. Their little box houses crept right up to my fence line, but I figured as long as they kept their landscaping mulch on their side, we'd coexist. I was wrong. She came into my life on a Tuesday. I remember because it was feed delivery day, and I was knee-deep in inventory paperwork when a glossy black Escalade rolled up just past my gate like it belonged there. Out stepped a woman in beige slacks, crisp white blouse, and the most judgmental sunglasses I've ever seen. She had that stiff-backed, slow-walking energy that screamed, "I make rules no one asked for." Karen Selter, president of the South Prairie Lake HOA. "Mr. Bain," she said, like we were already mid-argument, "I'd like to speak with you about a matter of mutual interest." I should have pretended I was deaf, but I nodded. "Go on." "We've been reviewing expansion possibilities for the Eastern Corridor," she said, gesturing vaguely at my fields like they were a sandbox. "There's an opportunity here for coordinated development. We could integrate parts of your land, unused, I assume, into our long-term community growth plan." I stared at her. "That unused land is planted with next season's corn. You want to grow community centers on my harvest?" Her smile didn't budge. "The HOA is willing to make a generous offer, above market value, of course. And with the prestige of our community, your remaining land would benefit as well. Cleaner water, better visibility, increased desirability." "I'm not running a boutique pumpkin patch," I interrupted. "I don't need desirability. I need feed conversion ratios and crop yields." She didn't like that. Her smile shrunk half an inch. "Well, I hope you'll reconsider. The board believes this partnership is inevitable." I watched her drive away without another word. That was the first shot fired. Over the next month, I received 4 letters, 2 certified, from their legal team. One claimed that my fertilizer runoff was affecting the ecosystem of their man-made lake. Another said the machinery noise during harvest hours was disruptive to the peace and mental health of their residents. The real kicker? They tried to argue my grain processing hangar was an unpermitted industrial facility that needed review under residential zoning codes. Residential zoning on farmland that predates their zip code. I had my attorney draft a formal cease and desist. I also reported their harassment to the County Agriculture Board and the Planning Commission. Every license, permit, and environmental clearance I had was ironclad. But when my south irrigation line got mysteriously blocked twice in 1 week, I knew this wasn't just legal pressure, it was personal. So I made a decision. I ordered 6,000 feet of galvanized steel fencing, 10 feet high with triple-strand barbed wire, and I had it installed right up against the border with South Prairie Lake. No gate, no view. Just a clean, cold reminder that my land was mine, and that I wasn't for sale. The morning the final section went up, I was sipping coffee on my porch, watching the sun rise over cattle pasture, when I spotted 3 of them. HOA folks. 2 women in matching lake life hoodies and a man in golf shorts standing on their side of the line, just staring at the fence like it had ruined Christmas. One of them raised a phone to take pictures. I waved. That afternoon, Karen called me. No, hello. That fence is a hostile act, she snapped. Karen, I said, a hostile act would be me installing floodlights and playing Toby Keith at 2 in the morning. This is just steel. You're escalating things. The HOA will respond appropriately. Looking forward to it, I said, and hung up. That night, someone spray-painted selfish across my tractor shed in red. I didn't report it. I just repainted the shed and installed motion-triggered lights and trail cams across the east perimeter. If they wanted a war, I wasn't going to shoot first, but I damn sure wasn't going to lose it either. I figured the fence would draw a line, literally and figuratively, that it would make the message clear. I'm not interested, I'm not amused, and I'm not selling. But when you deal with people who've never been told no in their lives, they don't hear boundaries. They hear invitations for escalation. 3 days after the fence went up, I got my first notice from the Oklahoma Environmental Quality Board. Neatly typed on state letterhead, stamped and certified, a complaint had been filed against Bain Valley Fields for possible contamination of a protected water source. According to the complaint, the runoff from my soybean fields was allegedly polluting the sensitive aquatic environment of South Prairie Lake, which, I had to remind myself, was a man-made puddle filled with fountain lights, paddle boats, and swan. Statues. There were no fish. There was barely algae. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the letter into the barn furnace, but I didn't, because I knew what this was. The very next morning, I had 2 guys from the board at my property line, clipboards in hand, squinting at the soil like it had insulted their mothers. I walked them around, showed them every tank, every compost trench, every irrigation valve. My nitrate levels were well within regulation, and my containment protocols had passed inspection 2 months prior. One of them, a guy with kind eyes and a tucked-in polo, admitted quietly, "Off the record, Mr. Bain, this complaint's a mess. Looks like it was written by someone trying to sound smart with a thesaurus." I offered him coffee. He declined, but he smiled. That same week, I got a letter from the County Sound Regulation Committee. Apparently, I'd been reported for unreasonable mechanical disturbance between the hours of 7 and 9 a.m. I guess someone in the HOA didn't like the way diesel engines sounded from half a mile away. I responded by submitting documentation that my equipment operations begin at 7:01 per state agricultural exemption. My lawyer included the decibel charts for each machine and a side note. We respectfully request the complainant purchase earplugs. Then came the big swing, a full-blown lawsuit. Not from the HOA directly, no, they were smarter than that. It came from some LLC I'd never heard of, Prairie Meridian Holdings. They claimed a boundary dispute, said a portion of my eastern grazing paddock overlapped a formerly unrecorded subdivision parcel tied to some long-defunct development from the 70s. It was laughable. That land had been in my family since Roosevelt was president. But the timing, that was deliberate. I handed the whole thing to my attorney, Craig Millstone, who looked like a bulldog and charged like a rhinoceros. He chuckled reading the filing. "They're fishing," he said. "They know it won't hold up, but they're hoping it stalls you out. Maybe makes you nervous. Maybe burns your cash. They underestimated my nerves." We brought in 2 independent surveyors, traced every inch of the property lines back to 1942, including the handwritten deed from my grandfather's first purchase. We dug up aerial photographs from county archives. We had land tax receipts from before some of these HOA folks were even born. At the hearing, their lawyer, a smug 30-something in a navy blazer with pocket square and no socks, tried to argue that, due to recent rezoning trends and urban development priorities, the parcel in question should be reassessed for residential viability. I'll never forget the judge's face. She blinked once, then said, "That's not how land ownership works, counselor." Case dismissed. They didn't stop there. A week later, I noticed my seed shipment had been delayed. Supplier told me their route was unexpectedly reprioritized after a call from the community liaison. My usual diesel provider claimed they were reviewing my contract due to conflict of interest concerns with regional accounts. Someone was making calls. Someone thought they could starve me out, slow the machine, dry up the well, make me too tired or too broke to fight back. What they didn't understand is, when you grow up baling hay in August, fixing broken axles in sleet, and learning to shoot snakes out of your feed bin, you don't scare easy. That's when I held the town meeting. I invited local press, gave tours of the farm, walked them through the barn, showed them the recycled water system, the biodegradable packaging from our corn processing line. Let them see the old family portraits hung in the restored loft office above the feed room. I spoke plainly, like a man with nothing to hide. This land isn't just soil and steel, I said. It's memory, it's sweat, and it's staying mine. People clapped. A local paper ran the headline, "Farmer Fights Back, Legacy Over Luxury." The next morning, someone burned the welcome sign at the edge of my drive. It didn't catch the grass, thank God, but the message was clear. The HOA wasn't done. And neither was I. I've smelled smoke before. Grass fires, diesel flare-ups, even a lightning strike that once scorched a hay barn on the edge of my cousin's property. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compared to the smell of burning legacy. It happened at 2:37 in the morning. I woke up choking on the stench before I even heard the sirens. My bedroom window glowed orange. I threw on boots, grabbed my sidearm out of instinct, and bolted across the yard. The eastern sky was on fire. My barn, my goddamn 80-year-old barn, the one my grandfather built with his own hands during ration season, was a column of flame. By the time I reached the access gate, the roof had already collapsed. The fire had jumped to the adjacent feed silo. Sparks spat into the dark like shotgun bursts. My crew started showing up within 10 minutes. Fire trucks rolled in 5 minutes after that, which in rural Oklahoma might as well be light speed. But by then, the damage was done. The old John Deere tractor I'd rebuilt with my dad when I was 16. Gone. The stacked hay and seed stocks, vaporized. Half the feed inventory, cooked. 20 head of cattle from the East Pen didn't make it. Burned alive or trampled in the panic. I found a calf smothered under 3 others, eyes still wide. I'm not a sentimental man, but I damn near lost it. One of the diesel tanks ruptured. The fireball lit up the sky so bright a neighbor 3 miles out called me thinking there'd been an explosion. It took almost 4 hours before the blaze was fully contained. 25 acres charred, 6 pieces of machinery totaled. One hell of a black scar in the middle of Bain Valley. When the smoke finally thinned, the fire chief, a leathery old vet named Wheeler, pulled me aside. Could have been electrical, he said, or maybe a chemical reaction in the feed room. You had any recent maintenance done? I shook my head. Everything's inspected. Last overhaul was 60 days ago. You know that, Wheeler. You signed off on the tanks. He nodded, but his face said he didn't want to believe what we were both thinking. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. Not then. Not yet. Because I had something they didn't know about. See, after the vandalism started, after "selfish" was painted across my shed, and someone cut my irrigation line with bolt cutters, I'd quietly installed trail cams and a surveillance system across the eastern boundary, not just motion-activated stuff. Full night vision, infrared, battery-backed, off-grid, and streaming straight to a private backup drive in my equipment office. That morning, while the fire crews were still hosing down smoldering wood, I pulled the hard drive from its mount and took it into my house, plugged it in, scanned the footage, and there they were. 2 figures. At 1200 hours and 43 minutes, they slipped through a cut section of fence near the HOA border. Both wore reflective service uniforms. One had a backpack and what looked like a thermal blanket. The other carried 2 red fuel canisters. I zoomed in on the patch over one sleeve, SPL Ground Services. They walked the perimeter of the barn, set something near the rear. One bent down for a long time, too long. Then they walked back out in the way they came. I called Sheriff Klein at 6 a.m. "Bring coffee," I said. "You're going to want to sit down for this." By noon, the sheriff had a full copy of the footage. I gave him access to every cam, every timestamp. I even handed over the raw feed logs. I'm a man who prepares for weather, war, and weasels. HOA folks fall in the 3rd category. Klein brought in a state investigator. The 2 men on the footage were identified by that evening. One was a landscaping subcontractor for South Prairie Lake. The other, a security guard for their community clubhouse. When they brought them in, neither lawyered up. They cracked within 20 minutes, said they were doing what they were told, claimed they'd been instructed to send a message. Nothing destructive, just enough to scare me. The barn going up in flames. That was a miscalculation. I nearly broke my jaw from clenching it. They wouldn't name names directly, but they danced around board meetings, private requests, and off-the-record conversations with Karen Selter. Said it was all verbal. Nothing in writing. Of course not. Karen doesn't get her hands dirty. She has others do it for her. By midnight, the county DA was reviewing the footage. The sheriff had ordered protective detail on my property in case things escalated further. I told them I'd sleep just fine, with my shotgun by the door and the cameras rolling. Before I turned in, I walked back out to what was left of the barn. It was still warm. Ash swirled in the moonlight like ghosts. I kicked over a charred beam and found the melted husk of a branding iron my grandfather used in 1951. I held it like a bone. Someone lit a match on my family's history. Now it was my turn to return the fire. I always thought the hardest part of war was the fighting. Turns out it's the waiting that'll eat you alive. After the fire, there was no immediate justice. The arsonists confessed sure, but the DA was slow-rolling the case, saying they needed more to pin it on Karen directly. HOA's lawyers were already spinning it as a rogue act by unrelated subcontractors. Just a tragic coincidence. Meanwhile, Karen was on the damn news. She stood on the steps of the HOA clubhouse, flanked by two board members who looked like backup dancers at a rich divorcee conference, and gave a statement with full mascara-powered solemnity. "We are heartbroken over the loss Mr. Bain has suffered. South Prairie Lake HOA in no way condones any form of violence or destruction. However," she added, and I swear to God, there's always a however with these people, "we must also raise concerns about the operational safety standards on that property. Perhaps if there had been better fire prevention." I nearly spat my coffee across the kitchen. My lawyer, Craig, was livid. "They're going to try to flip this on you," he said. "Shift the narrative. If they can't silence you legally, they'll drown you in noise." He was right. The very next day, I was served with a civil suit, from the HOA this time. They claimed I'd endangered nearby properties by failing to maintain adequate containment for volatile materials. Never mind that the fire didn't even get close to their stucco palaces. The gall was Olympic level, but that wasn't the worst of it. Two of my ranch hands received anonymous letters postmarked locally, the kind that make your stomach clench. One warned them not to get involved in land wars you don't own. Another simply had a Polaroid of the burned barn with a smiley face drawn in red ink. Then came the sabotage. One of my tractors, an old but reliable Case IH model, wouldn't start. I thought it was a fuel issue until we pulled the tank. Someone had poured sand into it. Gearbox was shredded, entire system ruined, $50,000 of damage, and 2 weeks lost on field prep. That was the line. I called a meeting. Not with lawyers, with the other farmers in the county. I invited 27 of them, old-timers and new blood, folks with 200 acres and folks with 5,000. We met in my equipment hangar under the buzz of work lights and the smell of scorched steel. "They think we're isolated," I told them, "that we're too busy working the dirt to notice they're trying to bury us in it." I laid it all out: fire, threats, sabotage, lawsuits. Then I showed them the footage, not the sanitized stuff for court, but the raw feed. A couple of the older guys just shook their heads. One woman cursed so loud the calves outside startled. We decided right then to file a class action suit on behalf of every landowner in the area who'd been harassed, pressured, or threatened by South Prairie Lake HOA. But that wasn't all. Craig and I filed a federal complaint with the USDA's Agro-Security Division. Destruction of agricultural infrastructure is a serious charge, and under certain conditions, it qualifies as domestic economic terrorism, especially when tied to an organized group. That same week, I hired 2 independent audit firms, one to assess physical damages and the other to evaluate long-term financial impact from loss of yield, disruption of supply, and equipment loss. Preliminary report: over $21 million. When the press got hold of it, God bless that one bulldog reporter from the Oklahoman, they ran the headline in bold: "Luxury HOA accused of arson in land, dispute with historic family farm." But even in the middle of all that, something strange happened. I found a flash drive in my mailbox. No note, just a slim black stick in a Ziploc bag. I plugged it into an old laptop in the barn office, offline, just in case. There were PDFs, email threads, meeting minutes, HOA internal documents. One of them detailed containment strategies for uncooperative adjacent landowners. Another had Karen's name on it, referencing external pressure tactics and how select contractors could be used to influence resistance. It was a smoking gun. I didn't know where it came from yet, but I had a hunch, a name I'd seen once or twice at meetings. Jonathan Reeves, quiet guy, mid-30s, lived in one of the original houses on the eastern edge, architect or something. Never said much. I remembered seeing him at that press conference standing behind Karen. He hadn't clapped. I didn't contact him yet, but I saved the files, made 3 copies, and secured 1 off-site. I'd learned by now that the only thing more dangerous than fire is truth that makes people sweat. Karen wasn't going to walk away from this. Not after this. The truth doesn't burn like fire. It burns slower, quieter. But once it catches, it spreads to everything people thought was safe. A week after I received that anonymous flash drive, I got a call from a blocked number. Normally, I don't pick up those, but something in my gut told me to answer. A man's voice came through, calm, low, nervous. "My name's Jonathan Reeves," he said. "I think we need to talk, privately." I didn't say much, just gave him a time and told him to meet me out back, by the west fence line. No cameras, no press, no lawyers, just 2 men who, up until now, had lived on opposite sides of the goddamn world in every sense. He showed up driving a weather-beaten Prius that looked like it had never seen gravel. He stepped out looking like guilt wrapped in khakis, shoulders hunched, hands shaking just enough to notice, but his eyes focused. "I didn't sign up for this," he said before I could even speak. "I bought into the HOA because I wanted safety for my family, clean sidewalks. Some damn peace. Not." He paused, swallowing. "Not this." I nodded slowly. "You gave me that flash drive." He looked surprised. "You figured that out?" "I'm a cattleman, Jonathan. I know the smell of manure when it's piled too neat." He chuckled once dry. "Karen doesn't know I sent it. Not yet. But if she finds out—" "She will," I said. "Eventually." He looked me square in the eyes. "Then let's make sure by the time she does, it's too late to matter." And just like that, the war gained a defector. Jonathan gave me more than files. He gave me audio recordings, a phone clip of Karen during an HOA board meeting, saying outright, "Bain's pride is his weakness. Push him far enough and he'll lash out. Then we paint him unstable, aggressive. We can trigger a seizure order if the county thinks he's a danger to the neighborhood." Another recording, Karen speaking casually to a security supervisor. "Don't worry, just scare him. A flare, a fire, something small. I want him rattled, not ruined." I sent the entire package to the sheriff and the district attorney. They called me the next morning. "Jesus Christ, Randall," the DA muttered. "You're not just suing them now. You're cracking this wide open." Within 48 hours, a grand jury was convened. 3 of the HOA board members, probably seeing which way the wind was blowing, came forward with statements. One woman, nearly in tears, confessed that Karen had promised them protection if things went sideways. She told us no one would ever trace it back, she said. That Randall was a bully, and sometimes bullies need to be taught a lesson. The media ate it up like it was barbecue on the 4th of July. Local news stations ran full segments titled HOA from Hell, Secret Recordings, and Arson Allegations. One reporter stood outside the ruins of my barn, gesturing dramatically to scorched beams and melted steel, calling it a war zone born from zoning greed. Karen went silent. No more press appearances, no more smug interviews. Her PR rep claimed she was taking a step back for the health of the community. Translation: hiding. But the pressure didn't stop. If anything, it escalated. I started receiving counterclaims. Karen's lawyers filed a defamation suit, said I'd slandered her name, incited violence, damaged her professional reputation. They accused me of instigating class-based resentment by pitting rural landowners against urban adjacent homeowners. My lawyer, Craig, laughed so hard he nearly passed out. Defamation? She orchestrated a goddamn arson. They want to claim emotional damage? Still, we didn't take it lightly. We compiled everything: dates, names, audio logs, video stills, sworn affidavits. The case was now the size of a Manhattan phone book, and that didn't even count the federal complaint we'd filed for agricultural terrorism. Meanwhile, Jonathan kept feeding me intel. He'd become something of a ghost within the HOA, still living there, but no longer attending meetings, no longer speaking to neighbors. His wife supported him, but the isolation was eating them both. "They think I betrayed them," he told me once. But I didn't betray anyone. I stopped enabling a monster. I told him what I told my men when they returned from tours and couldn't sleep right. Truth has a cost, but so does silence. And only one of them lets you look your kids in the eye. By the end of that month, the prosecutor informed me they were moving forward with charges against Karen, against 2 HOA board members, and possibly, depending on further evidence, against the HOA as an entity for coordinated criminal conspiracy. The fire had burned my barn, but the heat now? It was aimed squarely at them. There's a sound Oklahoma skies make before a storm breaks, deep, thick silence. The birds stop chirping. The wind shifts slow and low like it's bracing. You feel it in your bones. That's what the courthouse felt like the day Karen Selter finally stood in front of a judge. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I stood across the street with a black coffee and a clean shirt, watching the press swarm the marble steps like ants on spilled syrup. Karen arrived in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my best hay baler. Her hair was perfect. Her face looked carved out of ice, but her eyes, they darted. The sheriff's department filed charges that morning: conspiracy to commit arson, destruction of private agricultural infrastructure, criminal endangerment, fraudulent misuse of HOA authority, and reckless endangerment of livestock. Federal charges were being finalized separately because when you destroy $20 million worth of food production, Uncle Sam gets interested real fast. But even before her arraignment, the cracks in South Prairie Lake HOA had become chasms. 4 board members resigned within 48 hours of the recordings becoming public. One of them, a financial officer named Denny Lang, held a press conference in his backyard. No podium, just a lawn chair and a glass of whiskey. "I never thought I'd end up in something like this," he said. "I joined the HOA to keep teenagers from spray painting the mailbox, not to be part of organized intimidation and property crimes." That sound you heard, that was the HOA's operating license being suspended. The State Community Board issued a notice. Pending internal investigation and loss of lawful governance structure, all operations of South Prairie Lake HOA are to be transferred to provisional state control effective immediately. Translation: the Sabasar HOA was no longer a government. It was just a bunch of angry rich people with too much lawn and no one left to boss around. Inside the courthouse, Karen pled not guilty on all charges. Her lawyer stammered about fabricated evidence, a campaign of rural resentment, and gross misinterpretations of verbal statements. Didn't matter. The judge denied bail. Karen was taken into custody, cuffed, still maintaining that blank expression like she was at a charity gala that got out of hand. I watched her being led to the cruiser. For a second, just one, she turned and scanned the crowd. Her eyes landed on me. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just watched her go, like you watch a fire finally burn out. Back on the farm, the mood shifted. We weren't cheering, but there was relief. A quiet exhale. My crew showed up that night with cold beer and folding chairs. We sat near what was left of the barn, now just a charred frame and some stubborn foundation. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker. Someone else grilled. No speeches, no big toasts. Just presence. Then something happened that damn near made me choke. Jonathan Reeves and his daughter showed up. She was maybe 8, with glasses too big for her face and a shy smile. She handed me something wrapped in red cloth. "I made this," she said, "for your barn." I opened it. It was a drawing. Crayons. Bright green field, big red barn, smiling cows, sun with a face, and little stick figures standing in front of the barn. One of them was me. The other had glasses. A little girl with a name scribbled above. Lila. I swallowed something hard and nodded. "You got talent," I said. "Your dad's a good man." Jonathan didn't say anything. He just nodded once and looked out at the blackened rubble like he was still seeing ghosts. The media storm kept raging, but I stopped doing interviews. Let the lawyers handle it. Let the courts grind through the details. I'd done my part. And the town. The town stood with me. Letters showed up. Emails. Hell, even a pie or two. One note, handwritten in blue ink, just said, "They thought they could erase your roots. But fire doesn't kill a tree. It just clears the brush." The only thing louder than that barn burning was the silence that followed Karen's arrest. And in that silence, something was finally starting to grow. I thought the trial would bring closure. Turns out, there's no such thing. Not when your history's been reduced to ash and your peace measured in court dates. It took 9 months for the case to go to trial. During that time, my life didn't stop, but it sure as hell limped. I rebuilt fences, replaced machinery, and rerouted irrigation, all while sitting through depositions, evidentiary reviews, and expert assessments. Karen sat across from me 3 separate times. Not once did she look sorry. Not once did she apologize. In fact, the closest she came to remorse was a passive-aggressive shrug when her attorney claimed that Mrs. Selter deeply regrets any misunderstandings that may have occurred. Misunderstanding. That was their defense. That all of this, burnt barns, dead cattle, $21 million in damages, was just a big old misunderstanding. Like she'd accidentally keyed my tractor with a flamethrower. But the evidence? It was iron. The jury saw the camera footage. They heard the audio recordings. They read the HOA meeting transcripts, the emails, the threat letters, the contractor confessions. Hell, even the security guard who helped set the fire testified under oath, saying, voice shaking, that Karen gave him a verbal green light to scare Mr. Bain into selling. The courtroom was dead silent when he said that. Karen's face never moved. Like she was trying to hold the shape of the lie so tightly it wouldn't leak through her skin. My lawyer, Craig, delivered closing arguments like a man who'd been sharpening a blade for months. They didn't just attack a barn, he said. They attacked legacy. They attacked food security. They attacked the idea that a person who refuses to sell out deserves to be punished. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. The verdict, guilty. All charges. Karen Selter was convicted of conspiracy to commit arson, destruction of agricultural property, endangerment, criminal intimidation, and fraudulent abuse of governing authority. The judge read each count aloud like a funeral bell. She was sentenced to 18 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 12. No bail, no delay. Her only words, it was just land, just empty land. To which the judge replied, flat, cold, then you should have walked away instead of burning it. But Karen wasn't the only casualty. South Prairie Lake HOA was officially dissolved, all assets frozen, their charter revoked. The land set aside for further development was seized in a civil settlement, and by community vote, placed into a nonprofit land trust for local agricultural use. The trust named me, reluctantly I'll admit, as the initial overseer. Legacy shouldn't come from courts, I told them, but if it has to start there, let's make damn sure it doesn't end there. Jonathan and his family stayed in the neighborhood. A quieter version of it now. No meetings, no board, just people trying to remember how to live side by side without weaponizing bylaws. He stopped by one afternoon as we cleared debris for the new structure. You know, he said, leaning on a shovel, when I moved here, I thought this would be a step up in life. I smirked. HOAs always promise that. He nodded, then looked out at the fields. But I think my daughter learned more from that barn burning than she ever would have from a lake view and a newsletter. We didn't talk more after that. We didn't need to. The rebuild was slower than I liked, but deliberate. I chose every timber for the new structure myself. We didn't just restore the barn, we rebuilt it as something new. A hybrid, museum, community learning center, and archive for rural farming in Oklahoma. I called it the Bain Center for Land and Legacy, and on the night we hung the sign, I stood there with a beer in my hand, watching the floodlights kick on, casting gold across the new facade. My crew clapped. My neighbors came. Even a few kids from the old HOA. And behind it all, in the dirt, the blackened foundation of the old barn still sat, uncovered, untouched. I left it there on purpose. Some scars aren't meant to be hidden. A year passed. Oklahoma season still rolled in the same old way. Hot, dry wind in June, thick mud in March, sunrises you could taste in the back of your throat. The difference now was the quiet, not silence. A farm is never silent. But the quiet of not being hunted, the kind where your boots hit dirt and you don't feel like every step might land you in another trap laid by a suburban warlord with a board meeting agenda. The Bain Center opened on the 1-year anniversary of the fire. We didn't make a big show of it. No ribbon cutting, no balloons, just a hand-painted sign and free cornbread for whoever stopped by. It sits right where the old barn once stood, but we left part of the original scorched frame in place, welded it into the design, a ribcage of memory. People come through now, school kids, veterans, tourists who read about it online, even a few former residents of South Prairie Lake. What's left of it anyway? Without the HOA, the neighborhood transformed. Some moved out. Others stayed and started acting like neighbors instead of middle managers. Jonathan still lives there. He volunteers at the center now, runs history talks on weekends. His daughter helps out in the garden we built behind the archive wall. She planted sunflowers this spring. They came up strong. The trust holds. The land around the former HOA boundary is now a community cooperative zone. No development allowed, just shared use for education, preservation, and small-scale agriculture. Not everyone was happy about it, but most folks. Most understood that some soil had to be protected the hard way. My ranch is back at full operation. New equipment, new barns, even a few new hands, young ones, kids who heard about the fire and wanted to work somewhere real, as one of them said. We trained them slow. No yelling, no shortcuts, just honest work. Every so often, I get speaking invites, universities, agricultural conferences, community rights forums. I turn most of them down. I'm not interested in being a symbol. I'm a farmer. My job is to grow, not perform. But sometimes I go, when I know it matters. I always tell the same story about how people think land is just acreage and zoning. But out here, land is memory. Land is blood that never dried. And when someone tries to take that from you, not with law, but with fire, you find out exactly who you are. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find out who stands with you too. I still wake up at night sometimes. The fire's still in my head just for a second, the sound of splintering timber, the smell. But then I step outside, barefoot in the dirt, and look out at what we rebuilt. Not everything can be saved, but some things can be reborn.